Hey everybody, Chris Gallagher. Thank you for stopping by the weekly Preacher Spin Bible Study series. We are in John chapter 13, and today we're getting ready to talk about Judas, the one that betrayed Jesus. What was he thinking? What went through his mind? What was in his heart was the devil. We've already looked at that passage at the beginning of John chapter 13. The devil had already entered into Judas. Why did he do that? He was so close to Jesus, but yet he was so far away. So join us as we dive into this Bible study. Open your Bibles at John chapter 13, verse 21. That's where we're going to be today. We're going to work our way down to about verse 30 today. So hope you have a great day. Let's dive into our study. Oh yeah, by the way, check us out, preacherspin.org. Watching this on YouTube, Rumble, one of those places. Give us a like. Let us know what you think. And hey, go over to our webpage, preacherspin.org. Check out our newsletter and our podcast. That's right. We'll be bringing those things to you. But here we go. John chapter 13 and verse 21. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. What did he just get done saying? He said that somebody's going to betray him. Somebody's going to work evil against Jesus. So after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit, and he testified, and he said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you." Some translations will use the word verily, verily, some of the older translations. That is some information to say, really pay attention to this. This idea of repetition. One of the things, repetition is a key to learning. Also, repetition is a key to paying attention. So he's telling them to really pay attention to this. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." Now think about that. Jesus just mentioned a few verses earlier that somebody's going to lift up his heel against him. And now he says that somebody is going to betray him. So when he betrays him, says the disciples looked around and they looked at one another because they were uncertain of whom he spoke. Because Judas was just like each and every person. Judas was just like them. Judas had his feet washed. He didn't talk as Peter did. Instead, Judas seemingly is quiet from what we know about in the scriptures. But inside of him, even though he was gathered with 11 other men, including Jesus, Jesus would have made 12. But you know what I mean, the 12 apostles. Judas is already planning to betray. The gears are already in motion because the devil is in his heart. He sat at the same table with Jesus, but the devil is in his heart. He goes on and he says this. Says the disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom Jesus spoke. So they were confused. Verse 23, one of the disciples whom Jesus loved, we know that as being John, and John's not going to write his name into the text, but we do know that it is John, that John says he was reclining at Jesus' side. So all of this is taking place, reclines right at Jesus' side. Said so Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus whom he was speaking. Now, once again, what's the part that Simon Peter's playing? I love it. Simon Peter goes, hey, you ask him. You're the one he likes a lot. You're the one that he loves. You ask him. You're right there beside him. You ask him. As everybody else is doing this. So notice what happens. He says this, the disciple leaning back against Jesus. So he's kind of leaning on him. They're not at a table like we have a table. They're just all kind of leaning back. You know, they probably got some pillows surrounding them. And they're just hanging out is what they're doing. They're having a meal. He says he leans back and he says to him, "Lord, who is it? Who is it? Who's going to be the betrayer?" And it says this, "It is the one to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I've dipped it." Now think about that. Did he say it to John or did he say it to everybody else? Seemingly, he possibly said it to John, and I'll tell you why in a minute. It says, "To whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into Jesus. The devil was already in his heart, but it says that Satan entered Jesus. It's like this full-on measure of Satan. If you go back up to verse 2 of John chapter 13, it says, "During the supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot." So he's already got a seed planted. When he receives the morsel of bread, that's when this takes place. It says he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after he, Judas, had taken the morsel, Satan entered him. Jesus said to him, what you're going to do it quickly. Go do it. I know what you're going to do. Go do it. One of the other gospel accounts, Judas asked the question, is it I? And he knows. He knows who it is. He knows what's going to happen. But he says, go do it quickly. But verse 28, and here's why I think this is interesting. And I just put this in terms of understanding a little bit for us. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of probably discussion that's taking place as his disciples wonder exactly who they are and what is happening. It says no one at the table knew why he said this to him. So they apparently didn't hear what John had said. But what they heard him say is, what you're going to do, go do quickly. Not everybody at the table probably had the proximity to be close to Jesus when he and John were talking. So Jesus says that, and we know what happens, right? We know what happens. It goes on, and it says this. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, go buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor, which is a common place to remember the poor during the feast and festival days of the Jewish people. So you have this scene that's set there, and the reality of this scene is you have Judas, a man who is going to betray Jesus, at the table with everybody else, but everybody's confused because Jesus says that there's going to come somebody who's going to have his heel against him. They probably didn't grasp all of that until he used the words betray. Now, if you're in that room and you hear those words, you're going to start looking around to see who it is. As we mentioned in a previous lesson, Judas had some problems as well. Not just the betraying of Jesus, but Judas seemingly had a greed problem, a going after money problem, which may have factored into what Judas did when he betrays Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. But when you get down to the heart of the matter, this is a very interesting scene because everybody thought it was everybody else except Judas. They trusted each other. They had been with each other. But there's one in the midst of them that's going to do this. So Jesus says, go do it quickly. They didn't even assume that Judas is going out to betray Jesus. They thought that some good is going to come of this. And I want you to notice what is said next. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. They've been together as they've entered the home, as the preparations have been made. Now they've had this meal. They've spent this time together. Jesus has washed their feet. He's instituted the Lord's Supper during this time. Judas leaves, and all of a sudden, you have all of these things happening together. And now that it is night, and Judas leaves, which is going to set the scene for when they go into the Garden of Gethsemane, that the soldiers are going to come to him. You've got this army of individuals who's going to come and try, well, and not try, but do it, and to arrest Jesus during this time. But what's very interesting is the next verse. When Judas had gone out, when he had left, Jesus says this, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. Cross-reference that to John chapter 17, the first, I believe it's about 5 verses that you're going to find there, where Jesus prays for himself and talks about being able to glorify the Father, being able to have that relationship with the Father. And now when Judas is gone, it's those 11 that are going to be close, and it's Jesus. And during this, he says, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once. There's going to be a revelation that's going to take place during the death of Jesus that no one understands. It's going to be powerful. It's going to be earthquake. There's going to be darkness. The graves are going to be opened. It's going to be a challenging event to the human mind. But I would encourage you to come back tomorrow as we're going to dig into this passage a little bit more. We're going to talk about Peter's denial. And as always, I really want you to go over and check out the Preacher's Pen, preacherspen.org. Sign up for our newsletter. Listen to our podcast. Follow along. We're going to dive in to a little bit more tomorrow. But come back and see us. And thank you for being here today. And as always, we hope that you have a blessed day. We look forward to talking to you soon. Have a great day.